Mitch Northam, primetime Mitch. How are you?
Howdy.
So Mitch is chasing me when it comes to the number of published books that a gentleman has, and Jarrett traditionally leaves us after hour number one because the real world intervenes. But Mitch, Jarrett, has published his second book about it, and it's about Atlanta United. I was going to say it's his second book about Atlanta United, but it is his second book, and it is about Atlanta United. So we wanted to have Mitch on to talk about said book.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hi, Jarrett. Yeah. How's it going?
It's going. We were just complaining about the league and actually also college football. A lot of college football.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, because since this is a soccer show, then it has a tendency to go off the rails. Gee, that never happens. But no, Mitch. I wanted to get into this because it's about Atlanta United and about the 5-year anniversary of the title and everything that went into it. So Mitch now is at 2, Jarrett, and I am at 6. And so that means I have to keep my margins. I've got to get books 7 and 8 squared away. But, Mitch, when it came to piecing this together, I guess the first question for those that don't know is why you did this other than it being a round number to celebrate things.
Yeah, for sure. So for the listeners that might not know, I've been on here before, but it's been a while. So, I covered Atlanta United in 2018 for this website called Pro Soccer USA. Some of y'all might remember that. It was around for about 2.5 years, and then the pandemic happened, and the pandemic shook a lot of things up and brought a lot of things to an end. And Pro Soccer USA was one of those things that ended because of the pandemic. So because of that, a lot of the stuff that I wrote about Atlanta United that whole season is no longer anywhere to be found on the internet. You got to do some serious digging to find kind of any of the things that I wrote about Atlanta United during that season, using the Wayback Machine or digging through my old Word documents that I have on my computer, or going to newspapers.com every now and then. The Orlando Sentinel or the Chicago Tribune or the Annapolis Capital would pull some of our stories since it was all a shared Tribune operation. So anyways, I guess about a year ago, I was looking for one of my old Atlanta United stories and I just couldn't find it. And so that kind of sent me like on this quest to try to recover like as much as I could from, I wanted just to have access to some of those stories. And recovered like a good chunk of them. And I was like, like we're coming up on 5 years. I kind of wonder if this could be a book, if this could be a thing, if I could piece together like enough to kind of tell the story of this season. And I feel like I did that. I feel like I was able to recover enough of those stories, enough of kind of the key, beats and moments of the season. The next step after that was just kind of getting permission from the Orlando Sentinel, and they were willing to allow me to do this. After that, it was just kind of piecing everything together and recovering stuff. And then I had some room left over at the end. So I was like, why not include some of the other work I did, which I just decided to call Other Southern Soccer Stories, just as about, the North Carolina Courage, which I ended up covering after I left the Atlanta United beat, and some expansion stuff. I was at the Charlotte MLS announcement in 2019. I was at the first Nashville SC game, against Atlanta United in 2020, right before the pandemic kind of shook things up. And I had a lot of photos left over. So I decided to just pack it all in one thing and package it up for the fans.
Rowdy and Proud, Atlanta United's 2018 MLS Cup season and Other Southern Soccer Stories. We posted the link in our Twitters. So Mitch Northam with his second book hanging out with us here in hour number 2 at SDH. When we do these kinds of things, and when I say this, I mean authors, we're piecing stuff together. It turns into, but what's the mug, by the way? We have to have the mug identified. What's the mug?
Oh, this is, I think it's from the Outer Banks.
Okay.
I got it a couple years ago. It has a little crab on it. Yeah. It's a good mug.
When it comes to piecing things like this together as an author, it turns into a bit of a treasure hunt because you'll go down one path and then another path will open up, and then it'll open up a third path, and you'll sit there and you'll go like 3 or 4 different stages while you're piecing something together, going, man, I forgot about this. I forgot about this. I was developing this, and then this happened, and this happened. How much of a treasure hunt was this for you? You mentioned all of the different things that you had to do when it came to permissions, but as you were in the art of discovery, how much of a treasure hunt was it for you?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff, that I was able to get through the Wayback Machine. If anybody's ever used that, it's a little spotty. If you type in prosoccerusa.com right now, it just takes you to the Orlando Sentinels like landing page for its soccer coverage. So a lot of Orlando City stuff, a lot of Orlando Pride stuff. And there were a couple things that they pulled in from Pro Soccer USA to their main website, but not all of it, not nearly all of it. So yeah, it was a bit of a treasure hunt, just trying to find some of these stories. Like I wasn't able to recover everything, but I feel like I was able to recover a good chunk, through those couple of different outlets, through the Wayback Machine, through the websites that had picked up some of my stuff. I found my story about Chris McCann leaving Zlatan Ibrahimovic in the dirt on the Chicago Tribune's website. So that was interesting. So yeah, you just kind of, and that's like a moment that I kind of forgot about. And I was like, oh yeah, remember when Chris McCann left Zlatan in the dirt? That was fun.
Funniest things that ever happened.
Yes. Yeah.
Season.
One of the great moments of the season. So yeah, you just kind of, you forget about stuff. And then as you discover things, yeah, you remind yourself about different things. Like I had forgotten about, ahead of when they played at Orlando that season, Atlanta United's social media team put together that little video that made Tata Martino look like the Super Mario Brothers. I wrote a little story about that I had forgotten about. So yeah, it was definitely an adventure. Like I said, through all my old Word documents, through newspapers.com, just trying to find as much stuff as I could about the season and about the team. And I had some kind of like leftover stuff that I didn't use. Like I have a chapter in here that's just like quotes from Darren Eales ahead of the MLS Cup. And I never used that in a story, but I had all these quotes from him. So I just kind of threw that in there. And yeah, it was an adventure for sure.
Jared, go for it.
Yeah, and you talked not just about Atlanta. I mean, I know you had you had other things you were covering, because every time I talked to you, you were back and forth, like up and down the Carolinas, even coming out to Atlanta United 2 games when they were in the godforsaken baseball fields in Gwinnett County.
Yes, at Coolray Field.
Coolray Field, yes. He was hitting free kicks over the field wall.
Which did happen, by the way.
Oh my God, it was weird, man. I guess aside from Atlanta, what was this, like, a story that really, like, that kind of lives rent free in your head? I know you talked about doing North Carolina Courage, especially, and I know the Courage have been in the news for not as good reasons in the last 2 years, but man, 2018 was a hell of a time to be covering them.
Yeah. I mean, the 18 and 19 seasons, where they go back to back. 19 was like the season that I was kind of really entrenched here in the Triangle and in the soccer scene here. I was covering, the Courage and NCFC a little bit. That was Dave Sarakin's first season as the NCFC head coach. So I included a story in the book, about him getting the job and kind of what he wanted to do, with the club. And then that sort of kind of dissolved itself when they decided to go down to USL League One. And he didn't really want to be a part of that. But there was a couple just stories that stuck with me. I included, my story from the Courage winning the NWSL title that year. Big win over the Chicago Red Stars. That was Sam Kerr's kind of last game, in the NWSL. But in that game, Heather O'Reilly played, and we thought at the time that was her last professional game. So I have a whole story about that. And then, I think it was last summer she signed with, that club in Ireland to play in Champions League. So that was pretty cool to see. But at the time we thought that was it. And she really played lockdown defense and was awesome for the Courage and kind of a key spot. The player that I remember most, from that season was Dabinia. I mean, that was really kind of the season where her star really grew and shined. And so I wrote a feature story on her that year that was featured prominently in the Orlando Sentinel. And I was able to recover that from newspapers.com and featured that in the story. And, at the time, like people were calling her, the next Marta. And she's, I think, on her way to kind of maybe trying to live up to that. They're different players, but she is one of the most exciting players like I've ever watched in the men or women's game. Just how creative and active and awesome that she is.
I think she's more of the first Dabinia than she is the next Marta, because
I think you're right. Yeah.
Where I think that she is entirely different when it comes to her style and generational things and soccer and all that. And I'll pull the fourth wall back here. When I put a book together, traditionally my writing style is a circle, where I will start with a definitive moment that was probably toward the end of the story. And then I'll tell the story circling back to that moment that I talk about at the beginning with all of the details in between. So my writing style is more of a circle. When it came to piecing this together, were you more of a straight line telling the story of the season? How did you decide what you wanted to do and what your layout was going to be when it came to each of these individual elements?
Yeah, I kind of decided sort of from the outset that just, since I was sort of, a lot of this stuff is republished and, the stories kind of went as they went. I decided it was probably going to be chronological. I did write like a new introduction, and that's kind of centered around, I think a lot of us in 2018 thought that championship was the beginning of a dynasty. And as it turns out, it was not. But I think at the time, we looked at everybody that was coming back, even with the impending departures of Tata and Miggy. I think we all thought that, this was a team built to win, multiple championships over a span of years. And now 5 years later, there's almost no one left from that squad aside from Brad Guzan and Miles Robinson. So I kind of started the introduction with that, but then, just sort of went through the beats of the season. I sort of decided it was going to be chronological. I think that was the best way to kind of tell it. But there were definitely like some, a couple key moments that like I wanted to highlight. I thought that win over the Columbus Crew, I think it was in August. That was a really big like turning point for the season. Like there had been a lot of drama in July, with the whole Ezequiel Barco saga that we all remember. And there had been, a loss here. There was the early exit in the U.S. Open Cup, all that good stuff. Miggy was on a bit of a scoring drought. And then that Crew win, it's 3 goals, one each from Joseph and one from Miguel and one from Tito Villalba. And Joseph lays off an assist to Miggy, and he's like, I know he's been suffering and with the scoring drought. And so I thought that was a big turning point in the season. So I wanted to highlight that. And then there's a couple other games along the way that I knew I kind of had to have in there. But definitely I wanted to go chronologically.
Jarrett, go for it.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting it's an interesting look back, because I mean the Twitch pitch is going nuts about thinking back to 2019, because we literally just talked about this the other day, that like you are a really unbalanced Eastern Conference final game away from playing for back-to-back trophies.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess like for you, in terms of like the memories about it, what like I'm trying to think how to phrase this. I guess it's like, which of those games kind of like, I know you mentioned a bunch of them, but it's like, do any of them, like, you just remember every detail about them, be it the cup, be it anything else like that, just like you could pretty much recite everything that seems to have happened in it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the cup is still like a vivid memory that I have. I remember like where I was sitting in the press box. I remember, the feeling that I felt like when the final, like, whistle sounded and the stadium like went dark and then flashed the lights like for the win. Like I remember that that was just such an awesome moment. And like, I'm trying to finish up, my game story on deadline and everything. And then, I mean, the most vivid memories I have from that night are in the locker room. I had my camera with me, and I was able to get into the locker room for the celebration. Chris McCann doused me with a beer, so my camera smelled like stale beer. So about 2 weeks after that, it had to get a good clean.
Heineken. It was weird, man.
Yeah,
the whole locker room was weird.
It was a scene. Tito's up on the table and pouring beer into the cup and everything. So yeah, I definitely have vivid memories of that. And the playoff win over NYCFC, I think that was a game where, if memory serves, I think the night before I was at a wedding in Maryland, and we had moved to North Carolina, but I told Pro Soccer USA, I didn't have a job when I first moved here, so I was like, I'm going to keep covering this team through the playoff run. So I told them I would drive down, and I crashed with my friend Lily on her couch, during some of the playoff games. So yeah, was at a wedding in Maryland on Saturday night, I think, and then I drove down, early Sunday to get there in time for kickoff for the NYCFC game. And I remember Miggy's free kick in that game. That was kind of the highlight of that game. But yeah, a lot of drives down I-85 towards the tail end of that season.
When it comes to these kinds of things, I don't necessarily think a lot of folks know the drive that journalists have. And in your case, it's both figurative and literal, going 3.5 hours, each way to continue to tell a story. When it came to that season first, when it came to piecing this book together second, how much effort went into all of this stuff for you? Because, I mean, how long a project are we talking to get this book together? When did you start this idea? Was it like after season number 4 and you're sitting there going, okay, there's an anniversary coming up? How long did it take to assemble this project to where you were happy with it? Because there's part of a lot of us when we're piecing these things together where the jigsaw puzzle's there in front of us, and we sit there and go, well, maybe if this goes here and this goes here, and then, let's shift this over to this, and then we have to take the puzzle pieces and we just jumble them all up all over again because we're not happy with it. How long did it take for you to be happy with it where you could back away from your desk and go, I'm done, I'm sending this to the publisher, or I'm going to drive myself crazy?
Yeah, it probably kind of off and on probably took me about a year. I had thought about like the idea for something like this probably about 2 years ago while I was working on my first book, which you were a big help on. Thanks again.
No worries.
So I kind of was thinking about this, and, so my first step, as I kind of went on the journey of trying to do this, was just seeing how much I could recover, because I knew that if I couldn't recover enough, then there was no point.
Right.
If I couldn't recover enough of the stories, then I would either have to, write a kind of a book from scratch, and that would take a lot of work. I would have to do a lot of, setting up interviews and a whole bunch of new original reporting and stuff like that. And that would have been fun and fine. I just wasn't sure I really had time for that. And I kind of wanted to just, part of the goal of doing this was just preserving some of the work that we did at Pro Soccer USA. I really just enjoyed like a lot of the stuff that we did there and thought that we did some good stuff. And now it doesn't exist anymore, which is kind of a bummer. So yeah, the first step was just kind of trying to figure out how much I could recover and how much, if that was going to be enough to sort of illustrate all the beats of the season. And then from there, once I had enough, it was kind of trying to lay it out. And then at the same time of doing that, trying to figure out who I was supposed to contact at the Orlando Sentinel and the Tribune to give me the permissions to do this, since it was originally published there. Eventually, I get in contact with some folks, and they seemed fine with it, and everything was good, and I got the permissions I needed. And then, yeah, from there, it was kind of piecing everything together, and then getting in contact with someone to design my cover, and that was all good. So, yeah, probably about a year, in all.
Jarrett, what do you think?
Well, and yes, I wanted to ask you because you're in North Carolina now, and I know we've been talking about Atlanta for the last, I don't know, 10 minutes. Because you are in North Carolina, I want to get your thoughts on the growth of Charlotte, because when we were sitting at press boxes in 2018, it was Atlanta and Orlando. Things have changed mightily in the South for Major League Soccer. And I know it existed long before that in lower divisions. You know, we talked about the courage, but I wanted to kind of get your take on the growth in North Carolina with Charlotte, with Nashville up in Tennessee, and just the way the region has grown at the top level.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember, before Charlotte got its MLS team, like whenever they would have big matches, whenever they would host, friendlies or whatever, I would go to those games and cover them for Pro Soccer USA. So, like in 2019, they had a handful of them. They hosted some Gold Cup matches. It was like Mexico and Martinique and Canada and one other team that's escaping me at the moment. But there was like 60,000 fans at the match, for Mexico. So, and then, a couple months later, they hosted a friendly. I think it was between Liverpool and Fiorentina, and that was in the middle of summer in North Carolina, and it was a hot day. There was probably 40,000 fans at that game. A couple months later, the U.S. is doing its post-World Cup tour for the women. They play a friendly there. It was like a Thursday night against Japan, and 40,000 people showed up for that game. So I knew that like the soccer interest was there in Charlotte. A couple of weeks ago, I went to Charlotte versus Atlanta United, and I was really impressed with just kind of how packed that stadium was. Of course, we know that Atlanta United fans travel, but there was just a lot of teal in Charlotte, in that stadium, having a good time and having a blast. So yeah, it's been cool to see like that soccer culture, sprout up in Charlotte. And, it's another sign of proof that there is soccer fans in the South. I remember covering that first Nashville SC game, at Nissan Stadium against Atlanta United, and that stadium was packed. It's been really awesome to see. I think we've effectively put to bed like the myth of there are no soccer fans in the South. Atlanta United was certainly the start of that, but yeah, the expansions that we've seen lately, there's definitely proof there.
Rowdy and Proud, Atlanta United's 2018 MLS Cup season and other Southern soccer stories. Say that 10 times fast, by the way. Mitch Northam hanging out with us for another handful of minutes. The other aspect that I wanted to get into specifically that has nothing to do with soccer, so I'll let Jared handle the soccer questions and I'll handle the author questions. Hey
man, we could also talk. We can also talk about managers or head coaches moving off the triple option for all I care.
Oh,
we can.
Because look, Mitch is who I go to for, especially when it comes to the academies.
Yes,
for sure.
So,
them
saying Monken's going to not run the triple. Hi, welcome to Kennesaw. We're still running it for better owners.
And that's something that we'll end with in the college football version of the show.
That sounds good.
One of the other elements of this is you self-published this, right?
I did. Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of folks, and admittedly, I do the same thing, but a lot of folks, when it comes to putting a book out on the market, there's this innate fear, there's some apprehension, there's, is it worth it? All those kinds of things when it comes to putting books out there. And it takes a lot to self-publish because, first off, you're betting on yourself. You're betting on yourself and you're betting on the project, and you're making sure that everything is right and it's told right and it's being done correctly. And it's the idea of having 100% control versus the investment. And I'm talking more than just the physical investment of creating a book. It's a financial outlay as well. When it comes to self-publishing, how much thought were you giving that in and of itself? And how did you peddle this to publishers in and of itself, or just sit there and go, nah, screw it, I'm going to do it myself? How were you wired in this process?
I think with this one, it was a little bit different. My first book, I did, I had an agreement with a publisher initially, and then we kind of went our separate ways over, some disagreements about how long the book should be. And I peddled it to some other publishers and ended up going the self-published route. And it ended up being like a good experience for me. And I thought it was a good process and everything. And I was happy with the final product and how that book came out. And I did do a lot of work, myself in terms of promoting it and that sort of thing. But it was well received. And, I ended up, I didn't do it to make money, but I did end up making back what, everything that I invested into it, plus a little bit more. So that was good. With this one, I kind of thought that, when I went to the Orlando Sentinel for permissions, it seemed to me that, probably the best way that they were going to say yes was for me to self-publish and not, take those permissions and give them to another publisher. So that was like part of the thinking in terms of, doing the self-publish route. And I think the other part was, it just gave me total control over like how this book was going to come out and how it was going to be structured and all that good stuff. I don't know if I took it to a publisher again, like there might be some talks about length and, oh, we don't need these stories. And are you sure you want to have this in, all that good stuff. I think with this one, since I kind of already had everything written, everything was already pre-published before on Pro Soccer USA. I had a good idea of like what was going to be in there and how it was going to be structured. And I thought it was just going to be an easier process to kind of have that control over everything.
All right, Jarrett, you want to go college football down here to wrap it up?
I'm gonna cheat and do two questions because I do have a quick one. It's kind of cheesy. I don't apologize for it.
No.
In 2018, because everyone seems to have a different answer for this. And that's okay.
Okay.
At what point did you know something special was happening that year?
What point did I know? I feel like I kind of, coming into that season, I feel like I kind of had an inkling that like this was a team that could compete for a title. Just because of like looking at the roster makeup, like at the time, like there was everybody coming back from that 17 team, aside from your Yamil Assad and a couple other pieces. But you add Darlington Nagbe, you add Ezekiel Barco. A couple months later, you add Eric Rometti. So yeah, I'm not sure if like there was a moment. I think like there was the early season moment was when they just shellacked LAFC at home. I think that was like a 5-0 victory. And like doing that to them, like that was another team that like on paper, like top to bottom, just had this awesome roster. So when they did that, like that was pretty impressive. I keep coming back to that win over the Columbus Crew at home. That I think it was like mid-August or so, 3-1 win. That was a big one. I think just in terms of like getting the team kind of back on the right foot, and they had a run from there, to finish the season. I feel like all along, like I felt pretty good about it, but there were certainly like moments throughout the season where that kind of reinforced that thinking. And those are certainly two of those games. Trying to think of any more, if there's one that comes to mind. That there was a win over somebody. I can't even remember this game now, but it was like, I remember watching this game on like Twitch in my car, like on like Twitter used to have its own stream. I forget what game that was. But it was like some West Coast game, and they won that game. So I kind of felt for the most part, like through like they had a pretty good chance to compete, at least for the Eastern title.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I'm going to cheat and do a second question because what the hell, Jeff Monken?
Yes. For those that don't know, an article has come out yesterday from Stuart Mandel over at The Athletic. Apparently, Army is changing over to a primarily shotgun offense. Jeff Monken felt he didn't have a choice, according to Stuart Mandel, in the wake of an under-the-radar NCAA rules change last year that eliminated cut blocking anywhere but inside the tackle box. And so Monken admitted that they limped through last season back in 2018. Rules Committee eliminated cut blocking more than 5 yards downfield because of injury concerns arising from the preponderance of RPO plays. Now, with what is going on, Steve Shaw at the NCAA said the committee, in fact, had access to extremely specific injury data justifying the change. Paul Johnson says that he was on the rules committee when he was coaching. It was a constant battle then. They say that it's to reduce injuries, but they don't have any stats to back it up. I think a lot of it is just people just don't want to play against it, end quote. Jeff Monken isn't buying it either, but he's going from flexbone to shotgun, and there is gnashing of teeth and wringing of hands. So that's what's going on.
Yeah. I feel like I think part of the reason why Jeff Monken is doing this is because I think Jeff Monken wants a Power 5 job, and he's been like a finalist for 3 of them: Illinois, Kansas, and there's another one. And I feel like he needs to, like, there's part of him that thinks he needs to prove to like a Power 5 AD that he can run something that is not the triple. But I'm skeptical of like this being successful, just because I'm not sure that Army has the personnel to be successful in the shotgun. Like, the reason why the service academies run the triple is because of the personnel. Like, they don't have big hulking linemen to pass block effectively. And I'm not sure Army, like, you know, if you told me like Army is going to run a variation of like what Coastal Carolina ran,
yeah,
okay, cool. But do they have a quarterback like Grayson McCall to make that system effective? I don't think they do, but we'll find out. It sounds like Navy is going to stick to its guns here.
Yeah, they are.
Even under new head coach Brian Newberry,
Yep.
and still run kind of the old school traditional triple. Air Force has been doing this a little bit for like the past couple of years under Troy Calhoun, and has been pretty successful with it. You know, where they were kind of mixing in like traditional triple with some of that coastal stuff and some shotgun. So we'll see. Like, the Mountain West is a little bit different, like in a conference though, where some of that stuff works. Army, I don't know. Like, part of Army's thing is like how they schedule too. Like, are they going to play a soft schedule against, you know, 3 FCS teams, or are they going to play, you know, some MAC and a couple Power 5s and see how that shakes out? So we'll see.
Chris Klonakis is now the new OC at Kennesaw State. They're installing a pistol, and Klonakis was a part of that Chris Alt group that did fully loaded pistol in the 2000s that we saw with Colin Kaepernick and his success. And so,
man, those Nevada teams were ungodly.
Yep. No,
when Kaepernick was at Nevada, holy God.
Yep. Brian Bohannon says, before we could go knock them on the ground and be fine, but we can't do that anymore. And you mentioned the irony of Grant Chestnut now going to Navy under Brian Newberry, who got promoted from D.C., and so they're not abandoning it. So, yeah, that's Stuart Mandel at The Athletic if you want college football down here. One question that Abby had as a bit of a clarifier. It was all your own writings. So do you own your own byline and keep a file on your computer of all your published works?
So I don't own all my own writing, just because usually the way it works is like if you're writing articles for some places a freelancer, usually they own you know, the copyrights to your work. So like, you know, stuff that I do at USA Today for the Win, that's owned by them. Stuff that I do at North Carolina Public Radio, that's owned by them. So that's why I had to get permission from the Orlando Sentinel to republish this stuff. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that I write, usually I'll write it first in a Word doc on my computer. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. So yes, that's how I was able to recover some of the work, but not all of it.
And once again, I'm posting the link in the Twitch pitch to the book itself, available on Amazon. Rowdy and Proud, Atlanta United's 2018 MLS Cup season and other Southern soccer stories. And if you are interested in basketball in the Delmarva, his other book, High School Basketball on Maryland's Eastern Shore, A Shore Hoops History, that came out about a year ago. Mitch Northam and Paul Butler writing the foreword on that one. That one was fun to kind of proofread and get a peek on before everything was laid out there. Mitch, as always, my friend, don't be a stranger. And congratulations on getting the book published. And by the way, looking at our friends on Amazon, there's a piece of trivia. When it comes to soccer books, and Abby's got a great question about book signings, so we got to keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on Mitch and book signings. Piece of trivia. There you go. Piece of trivia this morning for this particular book. You look on Amazon, you look in the soccer section, the number one new release, this book. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mitch, don't be a stranger. Anything else is going on in your mind and anything up there in North Carolina, just come on and crash. It'll be fun to catch up with you. Thanks for hanging out with us for a half hour this morning.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if I have any courage stories or anything, I'll let you know. Or we can come back and talk triple option if you want.
Oh, we'll do both. Yeah, we'll talk
Yes.
into USL with you. We'll talk triple option with you. Mitch Northam, thanks for hanging out.
All right, thanks for having me, guys.